So, hi everyone. Good evening to you, and welcome to all my panelists and Dr. Warrior, Dr. Amit Verma, Dr. Ashish Kaushal, Dr. Vamsi Krishna, Dr. Anjana Joel, Dr. Chandrakant, and Dr. Krishna Prasad. So, I welcome you all for this panel discussion, peer exchange, and I would definitely like to thank um, Esai for setting this up. And then I would like to thank the Kavina Creations for connecting us all. I mean, for me, it's a great opportunity and a privilege to be with all the young and dynamic, robust people, so that I really learn a lot from each one of them every time I meet with them. So it's a privilege, and this is a panel discussion. That's what they said, and then peer exchange. So what I'll do, I'll uh, I'll just be, I'll just facilitate some free flowing thoughts and discussion on each one of the points. And you are all already, um, doing a lot of things. Let's hear from you. How do you see and how do you see the current data and the current status of the information, and how do you want to take it into practice, and what are you doing at every day at your clinic? That's what will be the point of interest. So welcome you all. Okay, we'll get going. Systemic therapy options, as we know, is now, a more it's more of a dilemma now with all these options available. We have the cytokines, and we have the VEGF TKIs, many of them, including the new additions like cabozantinib and lenvatinib, and we have VEGF inhibitors that is always there, and we now have the mTOR inhibitors, and we also have immunotherapy options expanding with the addition of avelumab and ipilimumab to the previously known options. And then we know that all of us, when we look at a patient, we may be looking at the age-old way of doing things, like whatever criteria you may be using, you would like to call this patient as a good risk or a poor risk. The other way to look at is whether the patient is presenting in an indolent manner or a very aggressive manner or somewhere in between. And then definitely you would ask whether it's a clear cell or a non-clear cell, and then some additional info like hereditary information, and then was the patient ever exposed to prior therapy, and that's going to influence your next therapies, particularly what kind of therapy was displayed earlier. So here is the first question. What is the role of cytoreductive nephrectomy in metastatic RCC? So what do you think about currently? How will you put your surgery algorithm, mentally? How do you approach that? I will begin with Dr. Vamsi. Dr. Vamsi, do you have a place? Do you consult your surgeon, urologist, or a neurosurgeon at all? Do you have a place in your therapeutic options to the patient? How do you approach this question?
So the risk stratification is the most important thing, sir. If it is an intermediate and poor risk, with the available data right now, I would not send for a nephrectomy. That thing is clear for me. In a good risk, we don't have strong data either ways. Probably I would still tend to send the patient if we are finding that there are only few lung metastases or the burden of extra kidney disease is not very high. I am, of course, any patient who requires it if because of bleeding or pain, I would send the patient, obviously. That is a separate indication.
Symptomatic. Point taken. Dr. Ashish, how do you look at this data, Carmina and Certime, and how do you interpret it and take it forward to your patients when you want to counsel regarding the role of surgery?
I think, sir, what Vamshi said is absolutely right. Most of the patients who presented with advanced metastatic RCC, they usually consult the primary with the surgeons, especially urologists. But I think those patients who are having more symptomatic, which we mentioned, like the patient is bleeding or because of the pain of, or if there is a abdominal distension because of the large mass, probably these are the kind of patients for the candidate for the surgery where they maybe get a symptomatic benefit. And we are practicing this thing before this data. I think everybody is doing the surgery and then we are using the TKI later on. But I think this is one of the data which showing, though it is a non-inferior trial, but the data is in favor of avoiding the nephrectomy, even though there's a more survival per patient, which actually they treated with the sunitinib alone. So I think as of now, I would be say those patients who is not symptomatic, if the patient is, if only if there is a very oligometastatic scenario, I think I would be still comfortable with getting an nephrectomy done. Otherwise, in high risk patient, intermediate risk patient, if the patient is large disease volume, I think I would definitely avoid.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ashish. And Dr. Warrier, do you think that this is a negative trial as far as we want to take it, and then therefore there is no role at all for surgery, or as Dr. Vamsi mentioned, symptomatic patient, and as Ashish was mentioning, based on the volume dynamics and all. So what is your take on the currently?
Thank you, Dr. Rajab. Basically, I do agree with them. Even before, I don't know whether you remember, even this has been a hot topic of discussion for many years. And all because people thought that even in metastatic setting, if you remove the primary, one tumor which can undergo spontaneous remission is renal cell carcinoma. This is what we study from our textbooks, but we seldom see it in our practice. As far as the current scenario goes, I think only symptomatic patients might require surgery. Otherwise, the TKI and immunotherapy will do the work.
Thank you, Dr. Warrier. Now, Dr. Anjana, is this a kind of a fairly acceptable summary of how a clinician should approach this? When there is minimal extrarenal disease, nephrectomy makes sense. And when there is poor PS and a poor risk and large multiple extrarenal disease and the nephrectomy does not make sense, and there is something in between where there's an in-between decision making. So do you have a difference of opinion to this thought process, Dr. Anjana?
Not really, sir. So I agree with it. So in the sense that the first patient obviously has what, like everyone else said, what looks like an oligometastatic or a very small extra abdominal disease, and which could actually potentially be resectable too. So and remember, all these patients where the kidney is still there are all at least intermediate, if not poor risk. So the question of good risk doesn't even come into play with these patients. So I mean, both the extremes are okay. The one in the middle, I think, is often should be in the decision making, should be in discussion with the patient. And of course, as long as you have a good MDT where you have a good neurosurgeon who also understands the pros and cons and what is feasible and what is not feasible to the patient. And we do have some patients who we treat who are exactly in the middle portion, where we've sort of we've gone and treated them with something and they've really responded well. Metastatic disease has responded, and then we've gone in and gone on to resect both the primary and the sites of metastasis as well.
Yeah, that's a very fair way of summarizing. That you have brought in the not only the upfront decision making, post treatment. If the patient is extraordinarily doing well, then again you are tempted to answer that question of what do we do with something still sticking out there. And but my question would be that, what if that primary lesion is kind of hosting the, what do you call that, dampening the host immunity and maintaining, let us say, for want of the correct word, some sort of homeostasis, and then you want to disturb it, and then you set the ball into a 9-pin.
That's a tough one.
No, it is just I mean,
yeah,
but
I know
this, and we do all these things. I totally agree with you. Just to put it in perspective. Now I will move on to the next question. Okay, we have I mean, you mentioned about the risk factors. I'll talk to Dr. Amit here. Dr. Amit, I mean, conventionally, advanced disease, do you routinely think about prognostic classification? Do you do all these prognostications? and then try to discuss that angle to the patient. How does the clinic work out, actually, Dr. Amit?
So we do all these prognostication. These are the basic workup which normally is done for all the patients who come to the clinic. But now this is a molecular era. So I personally look into some molecular things if there is needed. If somebody wants to know objectively, is it a poor prognosticator or a good prognosticator? And for this, we have two important biomarkers which are quite in advanced stages of using as a biomarker, prognostic biomarker. One is the PBM1, BAP1, and the other is PBRM1. So PBRM1, when it is a localized disease, carries poor prognosis. And if you have a PBRM1 mutation in advanced disease, it carries good prognosis. So the context changes depending upon the stage. And the PBRM1 is mutually exclusive to BAP1, and BAP1 mutations causes poor prognosis. So objectively, if somebody wants to really dwell into all these things, there is a second level of investigation which people can investigate if they really want. But seeing the clinical parameters, definitely the models makes important risk assessment. But practically speaking, there is no significant change in the decision based on these models, what we normally use actually. So everything remains the same irrespective. And in the practical sense, we normally offer nephrectomy irrespective of the poor, you can say, indicator or intermediate, what was discussed actually. So it remains the same actually.
Okay, so you have a different viewpoint. I mean, your introduction of biomarkers for the initial upfront thought process is well taken. We'll come to that a little later. And then you have also, I think, if I heard it right, you mentioned that irrespective of whatever be the risk criteria, nephrectomy will be an important tool for you. Is that right? What did I hear you rightly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Your point is taken. Dr. Chandrakant, then, so why bother about these kind of risk stratification? If we bother about, then do you think IMDC is currently easily applicable, easily doable parameters? So it's a good way to go. And do you believe that, this data set, which has more than 600 plus patients, clearly tells us that there is something to look forward to each one? But all these prognostic factors, will that matter? What do you think, Dr. Chandrakant?
Hi, sir. Good evening. Thanks for having me there. So, so the prognostication was not that important a couple of years before. So whatever the risk it was just lying in the guidelines and in textbooks, and we had to just by heart and go ahead and tell that. So, but now it is not just prognostic, but it is also predictive of what we have to give. So it is very clear that if I have a good risk, or if I have an intermediate risk with one risk factor, I can still offer cytoreductive nephrectomy. So that is what the best evidence for us says. Secondly, not only regarding surgery, but also whether we have to place immuno-oncology drugs in front line or keep it reserved for subsequent lines, again depends on IMDC risk stratification. So I think in the treatment of metastatic renal cell cancer, without doing a risk stratification, we cannot even think of treating the patient. So we must always risk stratify. If there is intermediate risk or high risk, we must always try and put immuno-oncology drug in frontline for maximum benefit. If it is good risk, we are okay using single agent TKI, or maybe there is evidence for pembro axitinib combination. So it is very important and must be done before treating any patients, because it is both prognostic and predictive. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for articulating it very clearly. And so yes, we all do believe that some sort of risk stratification is extremely important, and for day-to-day decision making, and how do we place our decision. So coming to the first line therapy in good risk patient, favorable risk patient, I have just presented the latest version of the NCCN guidelines. Dr. Krishna Prasad, you think this is the way you practice, favorable upfront first line, you would offer sunitinib, pazopanib, or pembroaxitinib based on this. And so do you have a choice between this, and how do you decide in your own mind which patient what?
Yeah, thank you, sir. So patients with a favorable risk, the other thing I would also think of is just keeping the patient on observation. So if the patient has got a very low volume disease and has got favorable prognosis, the disease is metastasized after say 2-3 years, then one of the options probably is observation or even metastatectomy.
Fine.
Having said that, of all the three options, probably if the patient is elderly and there are other issues with using immuno-oncology drugs, pazopanib, sunitinib would be reasonable options, even single agent axitinib now that it is easily available. If patient can fit into immuno-oncology, then giving axitinib with pembrolizumab is a reasonable option. So all the three options, that is single agent TKI, TKI with immuno-oncology drugs, as well as observation or metastatectomy would be options in patients with favorable risk clear cell carcinoma.
Yeah, thank you. Again, you also have put it very nicely. Let's try and talk about each of the points that were said. Let's say that today I choose my patient to be on a single agent TKI. Dr. Vamsi, to you, single agent, age-old option, sunitinib. Has anybody really proven anything superior to sunitinib? Is sunitinib equal to pazopanib? Have the newer drugs like axitinib, cabozantinib have really been shown to be superior to sunitinib in the first line single agent choice? What do you think, Dr. Vamsi?
So let me answer the second question first. Pazo and sunitinib, I think by and large are equal. It's our comfort zone. I personally prefer sunitinib in most patients, except a bit elderly where I go with Pazo, but otherwise I feel both are same. Single agent, right now, nothing has been proven to superior except the cabozantinib, but then the cabozant trial had its issues. It's not a very well-powered trial. The number of patients are less. So, I don't know if we can really push cabozantinib based on that one study. There have been trials of IO as a single agent which have all failed. So for me, if you have to use only a single agent, yes, sunitinib still stands the first. I guess we'll talk of the combination a bit later. So to answer your question right now, a single agent, sunitinib is still number one.
Point taken. So then, suppose then I want to go for combination. My patient is reasonably good in economically, and so the combination is always beckoning. So we'll come to Ashish. Systemic therapy combination first line have come to stay. Dr. Ashish.
So can I interrupt just if you don't mind one?
Yeah,
so
please.
Do we include the clear data in this? Lenva Pembro?
Lenva Pembro is coming coming a little. We are kind of debuting a little late actually.
So and the Cabo Nevo also.
Cabo Nevo. Okay. So this, unfortunately, even yesterday there was a new. These slides were prepared a couple of weeks ago, whatever.
Yeah. So I think that this is the only option which I think there is a good data of Cabo Nevo. I think so that would be another option. I think out of these all options, I think if you see as per the recommendation, there is no head-to-head comparison. But if you see in a cross-trial comparison, more or less the combination of VEGF blocker with immunotherapy is almost the similar results. But if you do the further analysis, maybe you will get some difference. As for the HR, I think the best HR with the Cabo Nevo, as of now, I think 0.50, while this Checkmate 214, the HR is 0.69, and Keynote 426 is 0.68. So I think if you see in direct comparison, maybe Cabo Nevo would score. But we need to look for other aspect also as far as the tolerance and toxicity profile and the long-term data is concerned. So I think as of now, we have a more data of Checkmate 214 as of now. So I think any of the combination of VEGF with immuno would be my preference.
Yeah, but Dr. Amit, I'm specifically still sticking to favorable risk group upfront choice. So Keynote 426 and Checkmate 214, have they convincingly shown us that there is no benefit with this approach in, in the favorable risk group? There is no significant difference finally in the overall survival. So what do you comment on that, Dr. Amit?
Yeah. So if you see the OS data actually means favorable risk is definitely is not that convincing. But I think these are the drugs which are approved on the basis of the PFS data. I think the PFS is significant, but compared to the other data, if there is a data of the Cabo plus Nemo, which is in favorable in a favorable risk category, that is positive.
Okay, so Dr. Warrior, at this point, everyone is favoring Cabo plus Nivo. Do you have a conclusion on favorable risk factor patients, sunitinib versus doublet? What is your take, Dr. Warrior?
Yeah, I think for a favorable risk group, single agent sunitinib is still good. And if you are looking at the PFS data, probably or overall response rate may be better with pembrolizumab plus axinated compared to sunitinib. But for a given choice, I think not much difference, significant difference in overall survival. So we should be looking at the overall survival for a lower or a standard risk group.
Okay. We are going to come into the poor and intermediate risk group. But my question to Dr. Anjana is this: in a practical note, day-to-day setting, let's say even with the newer data, in favorable risk group, in your mind, do you think that you would tomorrow you have a patient set where you are going to go for a more than option? I mean, how do you place that clinically in your mind?
So in my mind, for any patient with a metastatic cancer, I want them to have the benefit of all the available treatment options at some point in time or the other. So for kidney cancer, it is in my mind, when I'm starting my first line, in my mind, I'm already sequencing when he progresses, what I will plan his second line and third line. Now, for somebody with a favorable risk disease, I will put it the other way. So I will probably say that if at all, if I had to give single agent TKI to somebody, it would be somebody with favorable risk disease. And especially in our setting, where access to immunotherapy is limited, I wouldn't actually I think it would be okay for them to start with the TKI, and we could always use an IO-based regimen, any of the IO-based regimens as a second line, or even everolimus as a second line. Is
okay. That's very fair enough. That's how exactly how it goes. So moving on to the poor and intermediate risk group, Dr. Amit, you are able to hear us?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
So what is your take? Let's begin group discussion. And
yes, sir, please.
What about IO in them, doublet in them? How do you get this? Or actually still go? That is the available option cost-wise.
If I understood the question correctly, because there was a little poor connection. Yeah, please come again, sir.
Kavina, there is some other noise in the background. Can you...
That's my whole concern, but given that it has already been validated by an autonomous platform.
Thank you. I don't know from where that comes, but sorry, Dr. Amit, the question was in poor and intermediate. So everybody has spoken about how practical do you think today that you're going to look at a doublet IO or an IO plus TKI, or does it finally, after all the discussion, does it always end up as sunitinib, pasonitinib? How does it really play out in the clinic? How real?
In real practice, my choice and my peer's choice is is the TKI with IO actually. That remains the first choice for practical reasons. There's a cost implication with IO and IO, that is the significant one. And then it is easier to see the response of two different drugs. And then if somebody cannot afford the IO, you can maintain still on the TKI. So that is the long-term, you can say, intent of a physician to take a call based on that. But definitely we have a lot of interesting data, and what is superior for the patient, difficult to say. But both the IO plus IO seems to be very promising, you can say, data. But in my personal clinical practice, I have not used the double IO as of now. But the TKI with IO have shown good, significant response so far. So I'm still comfortable with the TKI with IO actually.
So by TKI plus IO, you are referring to axitinib plus
Axitinib with pembrolizumab. So that is the first choice. Yeah.
Dr. Chandrakant, between the Checkmate 214 and Keynote 426, and particularly in the intermediate and poor risk disease, do you have a choice? Do you have a way of approaching it? If cost is not a problem and access to the drug is also not a problem, access is not a problem. I'm again specifying. In your mind, how will you choose this option?
Sir, if you look into, I think both of them have got approval, IO and IO-TKI. So the only advantage of IO plus TKI is the number of patients who progress on frontline therapy are less, and number two, the response rates are better. I'm not saying of complete responses, I'm saying of overall response rates. So even though Nivo-EP said the 10% CR rate, so if you can look into a longer follow-up of Pembro-Axi, even they are also reaching to the complete response rates in par with the Nivo-EP data. So if a patient has any contraindication to TKI, then IO is the way to go. If I want response rates, the criteria, supposing a patient has bilateral lung metastasis, patient needs borderline oxygen, I cannot afford for progression. On that occasion, I don't know whether the patient may progress on IO, because we know that there is no proper biomarker for IO. Nearly 20-30% of patients do progress on an IO combination, but I cannot afford to do that in a patient who has bulky disease. Whereas if a patient has a non-bulky, poor or intermediate risk disease, then I may even offer an IO combination. IO, we think it is very toxic, but it's only 4 doses of EP and 1 milligram per kg. So I have a couple of patients, one of our own finance person, he had a very poorest disease and did very well. So it is not that toxic. It is some grade 2-3 diarrhea in par with any capacitive in diarrhea. So if you don't have a bulky disease where you can afford for a little bit of progression, the patient will not become symptomatic, IO is a way to go, because axitinib is not an easy tablet to take. It causes HFS, it causes diarrhea, transaminitis, and so on. Whereas Nivo-EP is a very brief duration of EP for 4 cycles, followed by you will have only Nivo going on, and patient keeps well. So non-bulky disease, if there is prospect, IO. If there's a bulky disease where I cannot afford for that window where progression is not acceptable, then IO-TKI, because I want to keep TKI in subsequent lines. So this is my take, sir.
Perfect. I think you have touched. You have brought in this particular issue to the fore, that initial progression. So that's what you red flagged. Dr. Krishna Prasad, what is your reflection on this particular idea that without the TKI, only the IO, either single or double, initial progression is still a problem. So what do you think about that, Dr. Krishna Prasad?
Yes, I think Chandrakant hit the nail on the head, and you have put up a slide which clearly shows that there is significant improvement or significant difference between axitinib pembro versus sunitinib in the first 10 months, whereas that difference is not there with the Nivo-EP arm versus sunitinib arm in the first 9 months. So we can easily see that the curves do not separate in the IO arm till 9 months. So the rate of dropouts are equal So that is what Chandrakant has flagged out, saying that if somebody has got very bulky disease and if he progresses, he will not be a candidate for second line treatment. It is maybe not worthwhile to start with IO, and it is better to give axitinib plus pembro.
Thank you. Dr. Vamsi, very impressive long-term outcomes with whenever we take the IO in some form, with TKI, without TKI. Look at the data and the stability of the flattening of the curve. There are real, flat. So how do we incorporate this in our decision making when we talk to the patient? Cost comes into the picture. You tell that there is going to be a percentage, 30%, who are going to be on the long flat tail. So Dr. Vamsi.
So I think in this, I have a slightly different opinion. It's not just the tail that I would be looking at. It's actually the response rate and the CR rate. Now, I know it's a bit of a discussion to have that, look, only 10 to 12% are getting a CR rate with these IO or TKI. But those who are getting the CRs, they seem to do really well. So yes, in one way, it's playing a lot. You're telling the patient that, look, you have a chance of CR and you get a CR, you're going to do very well. But by doing so, you're exposing your prime IO drugs right at the beginning. So it's a difficult question to answer. One way is we can kind of discuss with the patient that if a patient is slightly older, say 65 to 70, you don't know that your patient is actually going to go into multiple regimens. So that patient, I would want a long PFS. So that if they're able to tolerate, I would push them for getting a long PFS, try to get my, the CR rate going. So that's what my discussion would be. For somebody who's younger, again, the idea is you would want a CR, you would want a good response rate as well. So pushing for this combination helps. But I think the biggest challenge with the combination, as everyone has been highlighted, what do you do next? Patient either progresses, that percentage you showed, 20%, 10% progress. What do you do next? You don't have too many choices. So that for me remains the biggest challenge to decide on the IO upfront. And we do have good data for IO in second line. Nivolumab has given pretty good data in the second line as well. So that's a bit of a challenge, but I do offer a TKI plus a IO in the first line as of now, based on the PFS and the ORR.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ashish, I have put up a scorecard here on all the, let's say the frontline data. And is there a favorite that's popping out of this for you? And what is your, have you finally arrived at a choice with all our peers exchange? Dr.
I think if we are choosing a drug for the favorable risk, I think looking at the patient volume of the disease would be one of the major criteria. But I would prefer using a single agent TKI and keeping the immunotherapy in the second line with the patient into good rest. And as already we've discussed, for intermediate poor risk, I would prefer to combine with VEGF TKI with immunotherapy. And I think my choice would be either sunitinib or pazopanib as a first line. Yeah, I am using a single agent based on this data.
Thank you. It's your experience that is speaking. That's very valuable. And so, Dr. Warrier, is this a fair way of deciding finally a patient is IO eligible, and then we say that whether a single IO or a IO based combo or a TKI, is this a fair decision tree as of now, or do you think something else is relevant to be looked at? Dr. Warrier is there? Dr. Amit?
No, yeah. Hello.
Yes, Warrier.
It was muted. Yeah, basically the intermediate and the poor risk group should be getting a combination of IO plus one of the most active synergistic TKI, either as the axitinib plus pembrolizumab combination or sunitinib plus pembrolizumab. So basically when you stratify and based on the volume of disease, probably the first aim of treatment would be to achieve at least a stable disease. So you have to probably have to hit with a combination of therapy like the IO plus TK. So looks and if it is a favorable group, you can, as we have already discussed, you can keep the drugs for subsequent use. So sequencing is very important in that favorable group. So you can probably go for single agent TKI, and later we can expose them to combination.
Thank you. That's your experience. And Dr. Amit, this is again a recently released kind of a recommendation, European Urology. Do you agree on this? And do you have a comment on this, Dr. Amit? Amit, you are able to?
So yes, I can hear you, sir. So
the Nivo cabozantinib has been added to the kitty. And, this is
so I agree with the recommendations, first line, but no experience of combining cabozantinib with nivolumab, not available and very costly. Cabozantinib is too costly actually as of now. But for the intermediate and poor risk, again, practical choices, and all the choices are there. So I think I totally agree, and axitinib and pembro being the common treatment options for intermediate as well as the favorable risk group. So that remains a choice. That is the first line choice. That is the easy way to go forward.
Perfect. But the real dilemma comes after progression. Once we have all these, there seem to be a lot of choices to make in the upfront decision, but then the trouble really comes once the disease progresses. Then you kind of make your decisions based on what can I do? I have to do something, and I have these options. Earlier, it used to be easy when there was only TKIs and then there were mTOR inhibitors. But I think things have become very complicated, and you have so many upfront choices. Then you start playing the permutation game. Dr. Anjana, to you. So please help us choose. How do I stratify these subsequent therapies?
Okay, so in terms of subsequent therapies for us, if there's a patient who's failed upfront IO-based regimen, which is anything, IO-TKI versus IO-IO, there are two regimens, which two things which come to my mind. One is the cabozantinib and the lenvatinib everolimus. Now, if this is a patient who's had a fairly okay run with the TKI based regimen and has sort of had some response, I would probably try and give them or bone only disease. I would try and give them only cabozantinib. This sort of comes from some observational real world data, which I think is mostly based from the French group following IO based regimen failure. But now what is accessible to us in India is obviously lenvatinib and everolimus, and we would have to fall back on that regimen following a failure of a first-line IO-based regimen.
Okay, fair enough. And cabozantinib, you said, is predominantly bone alone presentation. Is that what you said?
Bone alone, and also, I mean, not necessarily. I think that's what the French data said. I'm not really, yeah.
Thank you for bringing your info. Thank you. And so, therefore, to Dr. Chandrakant, when do you think about this? As Dr. Anjana has mentioned, everolimus, lenvatinib, fortunately available drugs. So, when do you start thinking about this? And what sort of patients, Dr. Chandrakant?
Yes, sir. Sir, as you showed, we had all four choices: nivolumab, cabozantinib, lenvatinib plus everolimus, and axitinib having category 1 recommendations in second line. The only thing I can say about lenva everolimus trial is, number one, it is a phase 2 trial and the number of patients were around 150, in contrast to the other trials where the patient number were huge. Other few points to say in this is this has again the highest response rate and the best PFS when compared to any other second line therapy. So again, the response rate and the PFS, of course, this I think. So if I think this will be my preferred second line therapy if a patient has progressed on an IO in the front line setting. So if a patient has a very short progression-free interval on a TKI in the first line, then I will put IO as a second line. If a patient has a long progression-free interval on a TKI in the first line, then I will be using lenvatinib plus everolimus in the second line. So IO first line, long PFS with TKI in first line, Lenva everolimus is my choice. Otherwise, I will use nivolumab in the second line if there was a short progression-free interval with TKI in first line. So excellent, sir. This has a best PFS data, best response rate data, but the only thing is it's a phase 2 and small number of patients and well tolerated also. We can reduce the dose of everolimus. You can see the everolimus dose is in itself less inherently.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this important point. It's a phase 2 data, totally agreed. And so, Dr. Krishna Prasad, how will you take this, len everolimus data and then try to compare it with the available info and then try to place this, give it a rank in your mind?
Yes, sir. I think in terms of second line treatment, this would be on top of the pack. So unless somebody is not fit enough for a combination of drugs, this would probably be the choice. The other group of patients where probably you would not use this is someone who has been on a long-term TKI, say for 4 years, 5 years, and then progresses, then probably you will shift to single agent TKI rather than a combination. So either an unfit patient or someone who probably does not require it. Otherwise, most of the patients will be thinking of this.
Thank you. This is a first and only TK-mTOR combination approved following, and all that. So much strength behind this data, but there is one caveat that it's a phase 2. Granted. So, Dr. Vamsi, tell us, how do we, look at the data results in display in the post therapy options, post first line options? How do you merit one versus another, Dr. Vamsi? Phase 2, phase 3 collection, but then give us an overview on what you think about.
So I think this data right now is a little dated if we are going to use IO in the first line, because all of this data is in the pre-IO era. So for me, that's the challenge I brought in. So assuming that a lot of our patients don't end up getting IO, and we are going to be using mostly the TKI in the first line, that's practical aspect. Then in that scenario, I would still go with axitinib as a good drug if we cannot give nivo. So nivo would be my first choice. Second choice would be axitinib. Now, regarding this lenvatinib everolimus combination, it's complicated. The lenvatinib everolimus is not easy to give. You are giving 18 mg plus 5 mg, and it's not easy to give. I've used it for a couple of patients. The tolerance is an issue in that. So I would actually go with lenvatinib single agent in the third or fourth line. And all this is, of course, till we get cabozantinib, because cabozantinib has very good data. So ideal scenario, first line you give your TKI, second line nivolumab, third line cabozantinib, fourth line onwards, well, you are basically free to do whatever you want. That would be my approach.
So you are kind enough to let us free after the fourth line. So I'm thankful for that. So Dr. Ashish, commenting on all these, plethora of option, nothing seems to be perfect, but it's difficult to get a perfect choice in a difficult setting. Dr. Ashish, what about this nivolumab data in a post-treated setting? Can you comment on this data?
Yes, I think the patient who was initially treated with the first-line TKI, offering a nivolumab would be one of the very easy thing. I think the tolerance would be one of the major factor, because for the tolerance of the VEGF TKI in the subsequent line would be a really challenge, as Vamsi rightly mentioned. Even cabozantinib, which is a very impressive data, but I have used in some patients, especially in HCC, they can afford for that. But really, facing the really tolerance is one of the major challenges, particularly hypertension and HFpEF syndrome. So I would definitely prefer nivolumab based on the safety data. The median OS is 25 months, which is very close to lenva everolimus, which is 25.5. But I think I would definitely categorize the patient based on the previous therapy response. If the patient is primarily treated with VEGF TKI and the DFS is good, maybe 2, 3, 4 years, I would still comfortable if re-challenge with the VEGF TKI with like axitinib and cabozantinib. If the patient is a short duration of VEGF TKI, I would prefer a combination of TKI with immunotherapy. And if the patient is with a short duration of the VEGF TKI response, I think I would prefer a combination of either IO or IO with IO single agent or IO with another IO. That would be the my preference.
Okay. Dr. Amit, I'm throwing a very complicated question to you. What do you think about this Titan data? It's a phase 2 data wherein they tried to induce with the Nivo and then boost it with the Nivo EP and taken it forward to, so it's complicated. The whole idea is, is there a role to develop from a Nivo to Nivo EP, boost it using a CTLA4 inhibitor with a PD-1 inhibitor and all these concepts. So Dr. Amit, how does this look attractive to you or not?
So I'm not able to comment on the study design and what is the rationale behind this, but scientifically speaking, definitely the two approaches, the CTLA4 and the PD-1 approaches, definitely is superior. And whether we should go ahead with the first, initially with the doublet followed by a single agent, or a single agent followed by double agent, we are not very sure. But having said that, the priming of using IO to begin with will definitely give you a flavor that whether the patient is start responding or not. And then you can definitely consolidate that with the doublet. So that may be the rationale behind this, what I can see, because post-Nivo, if you have stable disease or progressive disease, definitely a combination may be superior. Before making the patient ineligible for IO, a doublet should be tried before saying that it is not working. So that may be the scientific rationale behind it. And you can safeguard with a single monotherapy. If you have a response, fair enough, you continue it. So I think that might be the scientific rationale behind it. But for scientific purpose, the doublet is always superior to monotherapy, which we already know about. But how to sequence that and how to save money, that could be the reason why they have planned this thing actually.
Point taken. Thank you so much for trying to, you really negotiated through this question very well. And so then to Dr. Warrier, how useful are these doublets really? And do you think it's practical in our setting, at least in the subsequent lines? Dr. Warrior, your doublet.
The combination, yeah, especially where the cost is major concern, we won't be able to combine these two drugs, and also the availability also, I'm not very sure whether it is really available. So right now we are left with single IO if it is already if the patient is already exposed to a TKI, and then subsequently only a single IO may be our choice. But this combination is supposed to be I don't think that it is feasible in our setup.
Okay, so it is available, and as was already pointed out, we do have patients in a double IO, but that apart is not easily available. Totally agreed. Dr. Anjana, for the sake of completion, can you comment on lenvatinib plus pembro data, and what do you think is the takeaway from this particular option in a previously treated patient?
So this again is a reasonable option. It is again it only indicates that we just need to use all these different molecules at some point in time or the other, and it also it is kind of correlating and saying that you use this is in even after IO based regimens there is still a response. So it is, even if you've used a CTLA4 agent with a PD-1 agent before, like the Nivo EP, there is a scope of still switching and adding a TKI and attaining a response.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Chandrakant, so finally, after listening to all the experts, I think I've tried to put together these considerations for second line option. And if the disease control is more than 1 year with first line, single agent TKI, continue some sort of a TKI and then sequence them with cabozantinib or axitinib. And if there is a brief response to the first line single agent TKI, consider quickly an IO plus VEGF inhibitor. Let's first take your comment on these first two kind of, what do you call this, summary that I'm trying to produce. Dr. Chandrakant.
I think so. You've put very valid points. They look very impressive to take them into practice. So, if a patient on a TKI goes long, is something like a good risk disease or even a good biology disease. So, we may get away by giving a TKI monotherapy. If a patient has a very short interval on VEGF inhibition, it makes sense. We must combine IO with a TKI. So, I think the very valid point, sir. Whenever there is a very short progression-free interval with any first-line VEGF inhibitor, we must always go aggressive to these diseases. And you could see the pembrolizumab plus lenvatinib data. In spite of being heavily pretreated, you could see the waterfall plot. Everybody going downward, excellently responding. So I totally agree. Whenever only TK is not doing well, very short progression-free interval, you must always get a very potential IO and a TKI combination for better response. Otherwise, these patients will deteriorate soon and we will not be able to give them adequate anti-cancer therapy.
Thank you, Dr.
I also want to add one thing. If a patient progresses on immunotherapy, definitely continuing immunotherapy beyond progression should be tried, adding the TKI actually. You may change the immunotherapy if you want, but that should be continued. So whatever you do, whether it is TKI, you go beyond progression or vice versa. So that is my personal, you can say, approach in case, because even in the short lasting responses, we know they are, these cancers are aggressive because of the various factors, and they are immunogenic cancers for sure. And both the drugs, whether all the TKI, especially the lenvatinib, have a lot of immunomodulatory effect. So even if you see a progression and you want to have responses on the IO, adding a modulator can be very helpful actually. So continuing beyond progression is what I'm trying to suggest here.
And if you have an IO progression, then you continue. That's one way of, it's an interesting way of saying. Dr. Krishna Prasad, with regard to the rest of my conclusions, if there is no response to the first line VEGF inhibition, drop the VEGF and switch to immuno single or double. And then if there is no response to a combination of VEGF plus IO, switch to something different like a cabozantinib. And then in second line and beyond, lenvatinib plus everolimus. Dr. Krishna Prasad, your comments on these kind of conclusions?
So basically saying that lenvatinib plus everolimus can be used irrespective of any of the above features. Whereas if somebody is not responded at all to first line VEGF inhibition and has progressed rapidly, it would be prudent to think about an immuno-oncology drug rather than try any other TKI. So if there is no response to the combination of VEGF plus immuno-oncology, then probably you can try to use the newer agents like cabozantinib, or you can always try lenvatinib plus everolimus. But like how Vamshi has put it, it's not easy to deliver this combination. So sometimes I do wonder whether our suboptimal doses or lower doses of both the drugs is as good as giving a single agent lenvatinib or single agent everolimus. Probably in the near future we will have an answer to that, and we may end up saying that a lower dose of lenvatinib with everolimus is probably going to do the trick.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a point here to make actually. Post progression, if somebody wants to do an NGS and investigate the biomarker. So let's say a patient started on TKI, progressed, and the option is to give another line of TKI or IO or everolimus if you want to offer that. So these biomarkers, what I mentioned earlier, PBRM1 is also a predictive biomarker. If you have a PBRM1 mutation on progression on TKI, definitely they are eligible for the IO drug. And if you are not having PBRM1 mutation, then probably you may have benefit using everolimus if you want to explore that. So knowing the fact that having a loss of PBRM mutation carries a prediction to response to immunotherapy is something which somebody wants to try to make choices. That is something which I wanted to add upon.
Thank you. I think I have really imbibed a lot of good inputs, and I'm very clear now which way to go now. So I'm just going to ask last comments from each one of you. I'm beginning with Vamsi. Can you please tell us, in your mind, one or two takeaway points from our peer exchange, Dr. Vamsi?
So most important is we need to discuss with the patient the options, explain to them clearly that these combinations are probably more expensive, but they offer the chance of a longer PFS. We have to explain the PFS and say that, look, we are likely to have an overall survival advantage, but it will not work in every patient. There is a subset which is going to progress. And once you progress on these two, which might happen after 1 year, might happen after 2 years, you will have to use other medicines. So I think that is the biggest takeaway message. The patient should not just get winded by things like overall survival or say that CR rate and then assume that it's going to a cure. I think we should avoid that kind of a hype. That is number one takeaway. Number two takeaway, on day one, we should have an idea what is going to be our next sequence. What are the drugs that we are keeping in line for that particular patient based on their affordability and based on their thing. And third takeaway is do not discount your single agent TKIs. For me, that is important. Yes, we would all love to use fancy drugs and newer medicines, but single agent TKIs do work. We all have patients where single agent TKIs work for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years also. So if you are a good risk patient, especially where the burden of disease is not too high, I'm not going to jump the gun and just try and push an IO in every case. So for me, that these are the important takeaways. And again, sequencing, that's what we keep talking about.
Thank you. So, when a lot of people talk finally, wisdom, it is well known that, a lady can throw more wisdom than anybody else in a crowded situation. Anjana, your takeaways, and with that, I think I'm going to hand over it back to.
Okay, I think Vamshi kind of summarized all the takeaways, but I think my takeaway here is there are guidelines and there are guidelines made in the West, and it is actually up to us to sort of make use of them, understand what we have to glean, and then try and tailor it to our practice. And what works there may not work well here, and it is up to you to make those choices for yourself and for your patient. Yeah.
Thank you. But Chandrakant, last word from you. Can you just finally comment on the role and place where this, our lenvatinib plus everolimus is going to find? That is doing justice to our, the person who supports for this meeting. Can you just finally comment on
Yes, sir.
everolimus?
Now, sir, in the frontline setting, IO is coming up in a big way. We will be frequently using IO in the frontline and even single agent TKIs. I think in the second line setting, as Dr. Krishna Prasad very correctly said, we must be offering this combination of lenvatinib plus everolimus for, I think this is one of the very preferred combinations. It has a category 1 recommendation with the best response rates. Even though it's a phase 2 data, I think we should be offering for majority of patients in second line setting, except for those who are frail patients or short PFI on first line TKI. Otherwise, I think this is a very preferred option. I think we can come down on the dose of everolimus if required, or come down on the dose of lenvatinib, because we also know that we cannot give sunitinib 50 milligram 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off. We cannot give even pazopanib 800. We will not be able to give. Similarly, this strength of lenvatinib or everolimus we may not be able to offer. But however, if we can titrate the dose, I think this is one of the preferred options in second line setting.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrakant. Eisai, thank you so much for putting us together. Eisai company, please, you can go ahead with your closing remarks. Thank you.
Good evening, doctors. I'm audible. Good evening, sir.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah, very good evening, and thank you very much, all the eminent doctors who have been part of this wonderful expert peer exchange on metastatic renal cell carcinoma. I would like to personally thank Dr. T. Raja sir for initiating this program and becoming the program director and moderating the session for the wonderful academic session. I would also like to thank all the doctors who have been expert from each of their regions and zones and are very wonderful, giving their wonderful thoughts and input support the management of metastatic renal cell carcinoma. I'd like to personally thank the doctors, Dr. N.K. Warrier sir, who has been the director, senior consultant, Department of Medical Oncology, MV Cancer Center and Research Institute, Calicut. I also like to thank Dr. Amit Verma sir, senior consultant, Department of Molecular Oncology, Max Cancer Hospital, New Delhi. Also like to thank Dr. Ashish Kaushal sir, senior consultant, Department of Medical Oncology, HCG Cancer Center, Ahmedabad. And Dr. Vamshi Krishna sir, Director, Head and Department of Medical Oncology, AIG Hospitals, Hyderabad. Also to thank Dr. Krishna Prasad sir, Consultant, Department of Medical Oncology, Mangalore Institute of Oncology, Mangalore. Dr. M.V. Chandrakant sir, Department of Senior Consultant, Department of Medical Oncology, Narayana Hrudayalaya Hospital, Howrah, Kolkata. And last but not the least, ma'am, Dr. Anjana Joel, ma'am, Assistant Professor, Department of Medical Oncology, CMC, Vellore. I think if you look at that, it's like a wonderful doctors been there in the discussion across the country. I think it should be prudent to say that, and from different renowned and reputed institutions and with your own experience. I'm sure all the doctors had a nice time in terms of exchanging their experience with the management of RCC. And as Dr. T. Raja sir, just want to steal one word from your this thing, sir. There is plethora of options available for the management of RCC now. And we from Eisai has one option that is lenvatinib plus everolimus in RCC. So thank you very much, each and everyone, for wonderful, for taking out your time and giving your valuable thoughts and opinions about management of RCC. Thank you to all the doctors once again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bye.